Hey, what's up, friends? My name is Andre, and this is the Tennis and Bagels podcast. And this is a podcast about essentially everything tennis, whatever tennis topic that comes across my mind or I discuss with people online that I feel like talking. I will be talking about in this podcast. And this 2 weeks we were supposed to be having Olympic Games, but everybody knows that COVID happened, and just recently we started actually having professional tennis back. And but before we get back into it, I'm gonna dwell a bit into the Olympics time, and I'm gonna talk about something a player who has had a very good season that involved the Olympics, and this person is Steffi Graf. And to join me today in this discussion is the person who actually kind of pitched this idea to me via Twitter. And I'm here with Vansh Vermani. Welcome, Vansh. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Andre. I'm doing fine, and I'm excited to dive into Steffi Graf 1988 with you today.
Cool. Yeah, I forgot to mention the year, 1988. That's when she won every single Grand Slam in a season. And also she won the Olympic gold medal, which is for so far, the only person who has ever managed to do that.
Yeah, it's an incredible feat and accomplishment, and one that I don't think we'll ever see by a male or a female. And I mean, it will stand forever in tennis history to win all four majors and the Olympics in the same year and complete the career Golden Slam at this level with the kind of depth and competition that was in her era in the 80s is just tremendous, and I think we deserve to relive it.
Yeah, exactly. And well, I think because we were actually thinking about like doing other seasons and whatnot, and I think just to start, like, why is this a great season? Of course, like there's little that you have to mention. Just the fact that she won all four Grand Slams, and that she won the gold medal, and that she's the only person ever to has ever done so, is already impressive enough. But I'm just gonna say like a couple of the things that I find is the most impressive about her year in general, and maybe you can say other stuff as well from your end that you actually really think is interesting too, and we'll go from there. So one of the things that I think is remarkable from her season is the fact that she won. She was the first and only person ever actually who has ever won the Grand Slam in the same season in three different surfaces. That's back in the day when they switched from to hard courts on Australia and in the US.
Right.
And the other one is the fact that she only dropped 13 sets in all of the matches that she played, and she played 76 in total. And in 7 of those matches she won, even though she dropped 1 set. So I think that was pretty dominant, honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, her streak really actually started in 1987. Really is that when she announced herself, because at this point she's 18 years old, and she turned 18 in 1987. And I mean, at this time it was pretty common to have youngest ever records on the women's side, and we saw plenty of players before her like establish themselves in their teens. Like we saw Tracy Austin doing that when she was younger back in the 70s, and but no one really was getting to Grand Slam finals and doing it on all the different surfaces. I think you mentioned a great point about the surfaces, because when I think of Steffi, I think of she's just so versatile across her surface. Her game was so adaptable, incredibly fast footwork, the ball control she had. I mean, tremendous racket head speed, especially off the forehand side, the powers she could generate. And I think the power is what really took her to the next level. Because if you look at the players that came before her, I mean, they had incredible net coverage. They produced great angles. Many players were serve and volleying. They were chipping and charging. Her slice backhand was such a major weapon, and she was using these. She had a plan B, plan C, plan D in her game that I think could get her out of matches when she was in trouble. And and you mentioned like she won so many of these matches so easily. Like I look back at her French Open run, 1988, and she beat Natasha Zvereva in the final. 6-love, 6-love.
Yeah, that took only 34
Yeah.
minutes on the clock. The match actually only took 32, but yeah.
And actually, it was the shortest ever Grand Slam final in the Open era, and that still stands today. And she lost a total of 13 points in 2 sets.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's just ridiculous. It's one of the you're mentioning like that the how dominant she was, not only in the number of sets as well, and then the games that she did, but in by set she was not losing, she was not dropping games most of the time. She was doing 6-2, 6-2, 6-1. She
yeah.
made Bagels rain, which is kind of funny because that's the name of my podcast, but like it's just really fitting, I think. But there was I was reading the interviews, I think from the Olympic side or tennis channel. There was a person that commented, I think in her second round, she said like, as soon as I had played my first game against her, I thought to myself, what the heck am I going to do? It's just the level of versatility that she has, which is actually interesting because when you think nowadays and then you compare it to, if you're looking across tennis in general, looking at Serena Williams and Victoria Azarenka, and also likes of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic,
Right, yeah.
Djokovic rather, she didn't seem to be able to have the game that would be so dominant on slower surfaces like Roland Garros, because she barely ever hit topspin backhand. She was like the type of fast court player that would just run around her forehands. You would think that you'd be able to dominate more on like longer rallies, but that was just not the case. In fact,
No.
she won her first Grand Slam in Roland Garros in '87, right?
87, right? She beat Martina Navratilova
Yeah.
in the final, and that was one of those scorching hot days, and she won 8-6 in the third, and
Yeah.
just outlasted Martina, really.
Yeah. And speaking of Martina, poor her, she just couldn't find an answer to her in Wimbledon. And I think that's probably one of the matches. Like, obviously, she was already incredibly dominant at that time. But I think if she hadn't won that match, hadn't found a way to win that match, maybe the rest of her career would have been a little bit different, because she lost the first set 7-5, and Navratilova was doing great on the serve, on the backhand. And I was watching a few highlights today, even like before coming to record this. And of course, you could always say that, oh yeah, there's strategic changes that Martina could have done. There's a few things here and there. But all in all, she was not really doing much different. She was not playing badly. It's just that Graf was just all over the court. She just run every single ball, and she would just make things happen, regardless of what position she was in at the court, and like regardless of where Martina would serve to her, regardless of what was body or backhand or forehand, she would manage to find a good return off of it. And
Yeah,
the results are there. She took it 6-2, 6-1, and she won like 9 games straight. So
yeah, it's really interesting actually how that match just dramatically shifted. Because if you watch the first set, I mean, like you said, she was winning. Martina was winning so many free points just off of her serve, because she was mixing it up really well. She was hitting great angles, especially the wide serve to Steffi's backhand. She was having a lot of success with that play, and she was coming in. She was cutting off the angle, and I mean, Steffi just looked a little bit like her footwork was a little bit off in that first set. I felt like, because one of Graf's major strengths is that ability to run around her backhand and hit. I mean, she can almost do anything with that forehand. She can hit it inside in, inside out, and I mean, her backhand slice is just. I mean, it's such a beauty. Like, if you watch her backhand slide and you just watch, like if they had slow motion video back then, I mean, that would be such a treat to just watch the way it's almost like, how when you throw a frisbee and you have to kind of knife it and keep it so low that it stays so close to the ground, and essentially your opponent is, essentially you're back in the rally, and you're remaining unattackable because your opponent can't really do anything off that pace. There's no pace on that ball. And it's spinning away from you. It has side spin. But against Martina was so good at closing the net and coming in right off the first serve. But she could just knock that volley. She could just knock that volley in the open court, and then, Graf was just left stranded. And so that's what happened basically in the first set. And I thought that Graf really upped her intensity, and her serve in the last two sets.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just unstoppable.
just unstoppable. And not only the serve, just her 1-2 punch. She was mixing in the serve and volley as well. Not to the extent that Martina was doing, but because Graf could also rely on her baseline play a lot more. And
True. Yeah, because that was the thing too. And it's not like I was looking in the highlights. That was the thing that I noticed very, very well, is that there's some sort of like misconception, I would say, that tennis, women's tennis just kind of became powerful during the Williams times, like when there was
right.
Davenport was coming in, and back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that was Serena and Venus, but
Capriati, Hingis, that era.
Yeah, exactly. But the game was already very fast. Like if you look at how they played, they were incredibly athletic. And I was looking at Martina, and when she was doing her volleys and doing backhand smashes, and I could see that she was a great player. She was not outplayed because she was playing badly, in a sense. She was outplayed because Graf was just too much to handle. She just couldn't find an answer to get past Graf's weapons. It was just the athleticism of Navratilova and her tactics at the net, her game style. Just nothing was just working, because maybe Graf was probably finding like a different gear. Maybe she was kind of like getting more in the zone as well, especially after winning so much during the year. She was probably feeling incredibly great about herself. So yeah, and just to give a bit more perspective on just how huge that win was, as well as that Navratilova hadn't lost a Wimbledon match since 1981. So it had been 7 years.
She had already won 7 titles back. Eight titles.
I think she was 8-0 in finals at that point.
Right, heading into, because she'd also beaten Graf the previous year in the final.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
87. She beat Graf. She beat Graf in Wimbledon and the U.S. Open, following the Roland Garros defeat.
Right. Yeah, Martina was also coming into that final with a lot of confidence, too, and you could see in the first set, especially I think even at the end of the first set, you could see that things were going to change, but you definitely didn't expect a 6-2, 6-1 scoreline.
Yeah, exactly. Especially after the first set, which was pretty competitive, so you'd think that that would be a little bit more of a thing.
Yeah. For sure. And Martina, I think, more than held her own in this rivalry as well. I think full credit to her as well, because, this was towards the dawn of her. This was past her prime, her career, and this is when Graf was really in her pomp, and like you said, I think actually heading into Wimbledon that year, she'd only lost 2 matches. And her overall record on the year was 72-3. So she won 11 titles out of, 14 tournaments played, 11 titles. That's as good of a ratio as you'll ever see.
That's Navratilova, right? Or is it Graf?
No, Graf, 1988.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
And you know what her 3 losses were?
I know. Yeah, surprisingly, she didn't lose to Everett or Navratilova the whole year. Right. She lost twice to Gabriela Sabatini and once to Pam Shriver. Right. And that's actually interesting too, because it kind of shows 2 things. One, like a bit of it shows a changing of the guard in the sense, because Sabatini was already one of the newest players, even though I think she only won 1 Grand Slam and made the finals of another 2 or something.
She was a perennial semi-finalist, finalist, top 5 player, but I think couldn't quite get over the line, and just wasn't clutch enough in those big moments against Graf, because actually her matches with Graf were quite interesting, and that was a really close rivalry for a while. I mean, I know even heading into the first loss, so she lost twice to Sabatini, uh, and her first loss was in Boca Raton in the final in Miami in before March. It's an event that they have before Indian Wells. And prior to that, I mean, Graf was 11-0 against Sabatini in their head-to-head. But many of those matches were going to three sets or a final set tiebreak.
Yeah, including those two, they went to three sets. Those two matches that she lost, they
Yeah.
went to three sets. And afterwards, in the U.S. Open, Sabatini also pushed her into a third set,
Right, yes.
and she only didn't take a set in the Olympics final.
Yeah, and I mean, and actually, many people talk about the Natasha Zvereva thrashing in the final, but of the French that year in '88, uh, 13 points lost, and I mean, you'll hear about that everywhere in the media, and it's not forgotten even today. But her match against Natasha Zvereva was so impressive because she'd already lost twice to her heading into Roland Garros that year, and once on hard and once on green clay actually, and both were in tough three setters, and for her to win that match 6-3, 7-6 in the semis, in danger of losing that second set and getting it into a tiebreak, and because that was her toughest match en route to her title. I mean, every other match she was winning 6-love sets.
Yeah,
She beat
that was a
that
semifinal,
was the
right?
semifinal, yeah. And so
Yeah.
that really showed you. I mean, and you could easily tell with her attitude and her. I watched highlights of it, and I mean her emotion coming out at the end of that semifinal was greater than when she won the final. And I mean Sabatini really had her number for a while. And I mean not just in 1988 or 1987, but really afterwards. I think Graf finished like 29-11 is her head-to-head against Sabatini, and I mean it was a terrific rivalry.
Yeah, and it's surprising, right? Because if you said that she started off as 11-0, right?
Right.
11-0.
Yes.
And then for Sabatini to come find a way to like win 11 matches, I think that's pretty big.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, she
Yeah.
won the next. Like, I mean, Graf was still winning 2/3 of the matches afterwards, but I mean, many times in big matches and big finals of premier events, premier mandatories, and also in the U.S. Open final 2 years later when she won her first Sabatini. So I mean, yeah, that was one of those rivalries you just wish like, maybe Sabatini could have salvaged two or three more slams, and she'd be right up there in that conversation of with Monica and Arantxa Sanchez Vicario and Graf and that whole era in the 90s. But yeah, just unfortunately couldn't get over the line in some of those moments. And they had very similar games too, actually. Graf and Sabatini. I don't know. I mean, if you notice, like Graf served a little bit bigger when it really counted, but
Probably Sabatini had a lesser forehand as
yes,
well.
lesser forehand. But I mean, same kind of just beautiful court coverage, and it's almost like if I don't know if this is even a good comparison, but it's almost like today, like think of Roger Federer as Steffi Graf, and maybe think of, another one-handed backhand player who moves gracefully around the court and has great athleticism, covers the net really well, and it's just kind of that matchup of like somebody who has everything and a little bit more. Like for example, when Federer plays Grigor Dimitrov in present day, I mean, a lot of their skill sets are very similar. Their game styles are very similar. They both have great forehands. They look to step in and dictate off the first shot. They both like to come
Yeah.
to the net and finish points off. But
But it's just like Federer is just a little bit more of a player, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like comes to Graf as well. If we go back to the 1988 season, it's not it's the season that marks her career as one of her biggest achievements, but it's by no means like, say for example, a player that has had like one big season and that was it. Like,
No.
not only is so much so that she started off the year and she won all of the 4 Grand Slams plus the gold medal. And then she went off to win the Australian Open the next year. So she,
Right, 5 in a row.
in fact, won 5 Grand Slams in a row. And then she won 7 out of 8 Grand Slams in 2 years.
And
So that is, that's just sheer domination. It's the season doesn't hold enough tournaments for Graf to win almost. That's essentially what it was.
yeah, and I mean, and like you said, I mean, some of her streaks in majors, I mean, at this time, I mean, I guess players were hitting their peak earlier in women's tennis, around 18. But for her to go from 1987 French Open to 1990 Wimbledon, that's 13 majors right there. She reached 13 slam finals in a row. Like she was either winning,
In like what, 3 years, right?
she was either winning or losing in the
massive.
final. And she won 9 of those 13. And 2 of those losses, I mean, were to Navratilova and when in 1987. So I mean, Graf hadn't really established herself yet, and really
Yeah.
just one,
But she was getting there.
really just one loss to Rancho Sanchez Vicario in the French Open the
Yeah.
following year.
And I just saw I took a note here of one of the statistics that just it's kind of like almost shocking to see the domination of her. Like as I said previously, she had won 148 sets and lost only 13. And in this span, she only played 3-set matches
Yeah,
out of the whole 76 matches that she played. She only played 9 3-set matches. Actually, that's what I wanted to say. 9 3-set matches played, out of which she only lost 2. So, and those are to Gabriela Sabatini, and that's I think it's a little bit of a shame if you say when we come around the GOAT debates and whatnot. As we said already, like establishing that she's the only one who has the Golden Slam,
right.
which by the way, in Seoul they have placed a commemorative plaque with like here's like this is where the Golden Slam was achieved, something like that, and it's a unique feat in tennis. So, and when we start like moving into GOAT debates and stuff like that, I think it would be interesting if we could precise at this point, like that we're talking about the male and the female, or if we're talking about everywhere, like in tennis, because I wouldn't think, for example, that I would place Steffi Graf below Djokovic and Nadal and even Federer in those debates. I think they're second to her.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the kind of dominance, that she had. I mean, and just like some of her quotes too. Like if you read some of her, press reports and some of those liners that stick out. After she lost the second time to Sabatini, she said, quote, "When you lose a couple of times, it makes you realize how difficult it is to win." I think it just shows like she was such a great champion. She also took the losses really well. And I think she just didn't take anything for granted. She was also not super imposing or intimidating, but really just kept to herself and let her racket do the talking. And especially in an era where women's tennis what had just come from Everett and Navratilova and Billie Jean King, and all these guys were major personalities in the sport who left a hallmark and legacy. Not only in tennis, in pop culture, and I just think it's so interesting that Steffi Graf just took this approach where tennis was everything to her, and it was all she could dream about. And here's another quote. It says, some of these quotes are really, really inspiring, and even now it says, "I never look back, I look forward." But she says, "You can't measure success if you have never failed. My father taught me that if you really do want to achieve and reach your goals, you can't spend any time worrying about whether you're going to win or lose. Focus only on getting better."
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of the Rafa Nadal,
Nadal
philosophy of it's kind of like always improving. And I just recently read an interview with Carlos Moya,
Mhm.
and he said this Rafa Nadal is probably one of the best players to work with because he is a second in Grand Slam number of titles,
Right.
and he's the beast in Roland Garros that
Mhm.
nobody can ever defeat, essentially. And but he Carlos Moya was saying that how humble Nadal actually behaves and how much he's like always listening to suggestions and feedback and always looking to improve in parts of his game and things like that. And it's interesting that we kind of like mentioned Nadal because
Yeah. Good
he
comparison.
in 2000 yeah in 2010 he had like one of the best seasons of his career, and that was kind of that brought a lot of change in his game as well. And we're actually going to be talking about this season at some point, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's gonna be probably. Um, so stay tuned, listener, for maybe next week or the week after. We're gonna be talking about Rafa Nadal's 2010 season and a few more. So yeah, it'll be cool.
Yeah, and I mean what I love about all these greats and all these champions and doing this podcast series is there's so many seasons you can choose. And there's just so nice to have so many options and just kind of look back and relive. Because I mean it's interesting actually that you mentioned Nadal. It's a very similar kind of attitude that Graf demonstrated towards her game, towards the game, and incredibly humble, never took any opponent for granted. I mean these kind of numbers that she has in 6-love, 6-1 type sets. These are numbers that you'd see from Rafa Nadal at the French Open in his prime dominant years. And I mean, never really got into any controversies or anything like that on the court. Great sportsmanship.
True. Never
Great,
smashed a
yeah,
racket.
great example to the younger generation. And that's a
hmm
little bit like how Graf was back in the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. I actually remember when I was getting more into tennis history and things like that. Back when Federer was trying to break Pete Sampras's record of 14 Grand Slams, and I don't remember exactly how, but I came across the fact that Graf had already like 22 Grand Slams, and then Navratilova had 18, and then so did Everett, and I was just mesmerized. I was impressed by this feat that those women were able to do, and I was like, that is just insane. Like, look at the level of domination. Like, the men are just not even close to that. I mean,
Yeah,
Federer has gotten to 20, which for me it's just unbelievable. But I don't even think he has another two slams in
no,
him. Although, to be fair, we did think that back in 2012. But regardless, um, time is running low for him, honestly. But
yeah,
um, this season though, like as I mentioned, like how unbelievable this is. Graf is one of only four players, I believe, in the Open era who have been able to complete the career Golden Slam.
hmm right.
Um, those other players are Rafa Nadal, Serena Williams, and Andre Agassi.
Andreas.
And
Because Federer and Djokovic haven't done it yet. They haven't won the
yeah,
gold.
they didn't. Yeah, so they might have a chance next year.
Yeah,
Probably Djokovic a better chance than Federer.
right.
Um, but in your view, like this season, I guess I have two questions there. Like just in the sense like looking forward and looking back, and just how unbelievable this was.
Right.
How do you think? Do you think anybody else will ever be able to accomplish this again?
No, I mean it's interesting you brought that up. Really, I remember going through Novak in 2016, and when he had just become the first guy since Jim Courier to win the Australian Open and French in the same year, and he had just held all four slams at once, and he was on the pinnacle and the absolute peak on top of the world, hoisting that Roland Garros trophy that had eluded him for so many years, and just to keep that motivation up through the entire season. And because I mean, even in these, even the way that Graf played, it's very easy for a casual fan or somebody to just go on YouTube and watch and think, wow, she has a great backhand slice, incredible ability to finish out points at the net. She's incredibly efficient. Her game is versatile, adaptable to all surfaces, etc. But they kind of take it for granted just how difficult it is to win and how physical these matches really actually are. I mean, even if you're winning 6-love, 6-1, 6-1 sets, to grind through like the way she did on clay, and her ability to outlast opponents on all surfaces, because Graf was so good on all surfaces. She won 7 Wimbledon, 6 French, 5 US, 4 Australian Opens. And, similar to the way people kind of underestimate Federer's grit and determination and ability to, bounce back from tough defeats and things like that. These are things that, normally you don't associate with someone who plays the game so effortlessly, like champions like Graf do or Roger Federer do, and things like that. And so I think just her ability to keep that up through the whole season and do it on all surfaces and against still really tough competition like Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova, they were at the end of their careers at this point, but they were still a force to be reckoned with, still competing in Grand Slam finals, Grand Slam semis, and I mean, she was just the greatest at this point.
Yeah. And I guess one of the other things that something actually crossed my mind, but I forget right now. If I remember, I'll probably mention that back. But
yes,
I
sorry,
honestly
to go back and answer your question just for a second, I
sure,
just
go
don't
ahead.
think it'll ever be done. It'll ever be done, ever again, really. I mean, Novak was the closest to doing it in 2015 and 2016. But, I mean, even Djokovic always says the Olympics is where his peak, focus and motivation is right now, I believe, too, because that's basically the only thing that's eluded him. And, to do it all in one season, like the way Graf did, I don't think we will ever see it, male or female.
Yeah, exactly. And Serena Williams, when I was reading the things, I came across, because there's a difference between the one season, but the next season there's more tournaments, right? So, like, for example, Serena Williams has 2 Serena Slams that we call them. Like, she has held all 4 Grand Slams, but not in the same season. Yeah, twice, not in the same season. And Djokovic has done so once as well. And the only man who has been able to do this in the men's side is obviously Rod Laver in the Open era.
Right.
I believe people have been able to do this. At least 2 or 3 people have been able to do this before the Open era. But if we focus just after 68, that's kind of like when most of the statistics are actually. I even looked at Serena's career, and I was looking into see whether she was able to do all of the Grand Slams plus the gold medal in 2 different seasons. And she wasn't able to. So, like, even in 2 different seasons, it's still something that is incredibly hard to accomplish, to achieve. It's just unbelievable. And then she did this in the same season, and the next season she did like the 3 slams again, and I think her record was even better in 89, not 89, right? Yeah,
89,
in 89 in terms of match win
and
match win loss ratio. Yeah, so it was even better. So, like, she pulled off like
she was almost able to do it 2 years in a row. I mean, that's, and you look at in 1989, she lost a close 7-5 3-set match to Arancho Sanchez Vicario in the. So I mean, her 1989 season was a lot like some of Federer and Djokovic's in their primes.
Yeah, and she was prime for so long. She was so dominant, like almost an entire. She retired. Yeah, she retired at number 3 in the world in 1999.
Yeah, I remember, like, she'd won the French Open in '99. She won that match against Hingis, and I mean that's one match actually that got away from Hingis, because she was serving for it at 6-4, 5-4, and she let outside things kind of affect her, and there was some controversy. She took a 15-minute bathroom break. She lost that set. And I think and Steffi at that point was kind of at the end of her career. She had already made up her mind basically after winning that she A, wanted to go on top, but B, also because she'd had incredible longevity, and she was already, I mean, at that time, 30 years. If you were playing until you were 30, that's that's an achievement. I mean, it's not even quite to the extent like Navratilova and Evert. They played until they were 33, 34 years old. But I mean, Graf was already physically, her body was breaking down, a lot of injuries. So she won the French Open in '99, defeated Hingis, and then lost the final to Navratilova and called it
Yeah.
quits at Wimbledon.
Yeah. And I think my other question is also it's kind of like related to the greatest of all time discussion. If we like opening
For the men,
the
or I mean, like for both men and
and,
women,
and
or
and overall, like if you're opening for both men, male and female to compete, of course
yeah,
it's very hard if you're comparing both tours because they don't play against each other. So
right.
you already miss the fact that like you already are missing head to heads and things like that. Like how
It's
would they
very
compare?
difficult to compare it to both sexes. Probably
Yeah.
better if you just you
Yeah, but like, would you say that like because seasons are a little bit different as well, I
yeah.
find. So would you say that Graf has had the best season of all time? Is this the best season of all time?
So amongst the women's side, I think it definitely has to be number one. Just because I mean, look, I mean, Serena was fantastic in 2015, 2013, 2002, 2003. She was winning, roughly 94%, 95%. I mean, 72-3 win percentage for Graf in 98 by itself, if you just looked at that number, it might not be number one. But just the Golden Slam and the amount of six love sets and her place in tennis history by you know by overcoming her, because to lose twice to the same opponent and have that be on your mind coming into such a big match, and then overcoming that rivalry and turning that around in the same season, as well as winning all four slams and the gold medal, for me that puts it right at the top. And I know, I mean, I don't know too much about before the Open era, and I know that, for instance, Margaret Court had 24 slams, but only 11 of them were in the Open era. And so the level of competition was different. Many people were skipping Australian Opens. And, I mean, at this time what's so important is that in 1988, the Australian Open also moved surfaces, right? So before it used to be played on grass, now it's on hard court, and it was also the first slam of the year. So basically, a lot more players were playing the Australian Open at this point in time. So it's not even like the Australian Open is an asterisk. There's really just no knock on her. I mean, overall, you can't even say like, oh, she was in a weak generation, or oh, she, there's just nothing really to knock her out.
Yeah, exactly. Like she was just there's nothing that you can say essentially
Yeah,
against her. Like you could say, for example, like some people bring up their argument against Federer's
right.
seasons between
The weak era,
'04 and '07.
the weak era in
Yeah,
quotes.
but it's just Navratilova. Steffi Graf had to play against so many great players, and including the fact that you've just mentioned how they switched to hard
Yeah,
courts. That's basically one of the biggest reasons why Everett beat Navratilova in the semifinals of that slam, and then coming to the final,
of
it may
the
have benefited a
of the
bit.
Australian, you're
Um,
saying
s-
in 1988?
yeah, Australian
Yeah,
Open in
she beat she beat Everett
1998.
in the final. Right.
Yeah, she beat
Yeah,
Everett 6-1, seven 6 in
176.
the
Right.
final on a slower, bouncier court
Hmm.
that probably fitted her game a bit better.
Right.
And while it can always be kind of like arguing in a sense like, oh, what would it have been whether if it was Grass Slam still that year and then Navratilova had made the final, like would Graf had the same year? But I think there's a great point in just Graf winning against Navratilova on grass at Wimbledon after Navratilova had beaten her, I think, the year before and had been unbeaten for 7 years straight. And arguably the best Wimbledon player of all time at 9 Wimbledon titles. What she accomplished in defeating her on grass as well, I think, is quite of a testimony of like how it's proof of how she is not just like a slow court player, and she is able to beat fast court players in their own game, and she's able to outplay them. And just those two sets, it's just 6-2, 6-2, 6-1 is it just shows that there's no luck involved. It's just essentially how great she did. There was a quote that I picked up from a website which I forget. I think it was from maybe from the tennis channels or the Olympic website. I think it was from the Olympic website. It's so speaking about the second set, the shift came at last with Navratilova serving at 2-0. Two of her deliveries drifted away from Graf's backhand, and the German made her play with two forehand return winners. Navratilova was broken, and so was the dam. She wouldn't hold again as Graf won 9 games in a row in the first of her 7 Wimbledon titles, 5-7, 6-2, 6-1. Quote, "It was like trying to stop a runaway train."
Right, I remember that. Yeah. I came across that quote too in the website.
Yeah. From Peter Alfano, right. Who wrote that in the New York Times.
I mean, it's a great piece. It just shows like once she got her groove into the match, and because she had so many different styles of playing too. You know, it wasn't just one particular game that worked on grass or serve and volleys, or like some of the. I'm not saying that the players before her didn't have a plan B or a plan C. But it's just that the shift from Martina Navratilova to Graf, there was a difference in power too. Like, I mean, if you look at, because Martina had such great hands and such great feel, such good touch of both the backhand volley and the forehand volley, but Graf was not only able to dip the ball down low, she was able to do it with pace and with such speed that Navratilova just couldn't. She would just pop one up short, and then Graf would have a lot of the court to work with. And she was, just using her all court craft beautifully. And I think it was just without being able to really penetrate through the court, it was just going to be so hard to stop her. And just you might think, okay, keep on hitting it to her backhand and just letting that side break down. But her ability to surprise you and then suddenly flatten the backhand out and go down the line and cross was beautiful, because her slice backhand was so dependable on grass, and it just set up her forehand beautifully. And her forehand today, I think, would have held up. Like, there's no doubt in my mind, if you watch her footwork and the small adjustment steps she makes to come around the ball, especially on the ad side, her inside out and inside in forehand. I mean, her footwork is up there, I'd say, with some of the best in the game today, like Simona Halep.
Yeah, actually, I totally agree with you on that, and that I think her game, if she were to be playing now, in this era, I think the only thing that she would have probably like a little bit more trouble with would be hitting the backhand topspin, because she would really rely on the slice. What's it called? On the slice. And today people are more able to bring the ball up and down with a lot of spin, a little bit more easily, because of changes in how they pick their grips and whatnot. But it would still be, she would probably still have won slams, probably would have won a lot of them. Like, I don't think she would have, maybe she wouldn't have been able to win 22, but she would have been able to be up there, like a solid 15, 16. I think she'd be able to.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up how she would do today, because actually I was also looking. She'd played Serena Williams twice, and they were both in 1999. When Serena won her first slam, was it 1999 U.S. Open? She beat Hingis in the final. So that year, I mean, the Williams sisters had already come up by then, and Serena was about 17, 18 years old. And normally, like I think you mentioned earlier in the podcast, that people look at the Williams sisters and think, oh wow, this is when the game really shifted to the power game, and this is when players were playing mostly from the baseline, and surfaces started to. I mean, they were still playing fast, but they started to homogenize in the 2000s and all that. But actually, she held up really well, and this was at the end of her career in 1999. And she played Serena twice, and they finished at 1-1 each. And they played in the Indian Wells final. I mean, it was a tight 7-5. Serena won it 7-5 in the third. They split 6-3 sets. And just before that, also they played in Sydney before the Australian Open, and Graf won that 7-5 in the third. And it's so interesting, actually. Like, who would have thought 20 years later, Serena would be at 23, Steffi would be at 22, and we'd be having this GOAT debate and greatest of all time. But in reality, I mean, that those two results right there just back up what you were saying before. That, I mean, had she played in this era today, I think I completely agree with you. Yeah, I mean, she would have had to adapt on the backhand, take the ball earlier, a bit like Federer does now, take time away off the return, and she'd have to make all these adjustments. But I mean, not a whole lot. Like, her game would have really
Sure, yeah.
would have stood up with anybody. Like, I think
Yeah.
even
And
today.
when I was checking a bit of some of the highlights, it was a longer video. It wasn't just like a 2-minute highlight. But like she, when I was playing Navratilova, she was it's kind of like and you kind of like can draw a bit of a comparison. That's how I felt in the beginning, like in the first set, 7-5. It felt a little bit like a Rafa Nadal, Roger Federer type of situation,
Right.
in which Navratilova would just slice it endlessly to Graf's backhand, and that would just leave the court open and to get like a nice put away volley,
Yeah.
which she did brilliantly. But starting on the second set, when Graf started like feeling her backhands a little bit more, and she was just hopping like a bunny on court, like running around her backhands. And even when the balls would come to her backhand, she would just block the shot just so nicely on such awkward spots for a volley. As you mentioned, she'd be able to keep that really low, and at times she would just come up with a winner, just like she was just able to play around with the ball however she wanted. And Navratilova, she started, you can kind of like see how she started breaking her tactics were just not holding up anymore. She just didn't necessarily know exactly what to do. She started serving a lot to Graf's body.
Yeah.
But that was just a terrible decision, because what Graf would do is she was just so ready to take that ball onto her backhand to run around it.
Yeah, I mean,
That she would just like take one last step that she would to run around the forehand if she would serve to her actual backhand side, and she would just like run around that easily and just hit a big forehand, and that was it. Navratilova just had nowhere to place her serve. She tried serving to her forehand sometimes, and that got some results, but it's almost like Graf was just ready. She was ready for anything. She was fast. She was moving. And there was nowhere you could hit that she wouldn't hit the the ball back with interest. It was just so fantastic to see that. And if I'm comparing to the last episode that I did with Andy Murray playing against Roger Federer, and Andy Murray's tactic was kind of similar to Navratilova, in which he served especially on the ad side
the
Olympics. The Olympics match.
Right.
Yeah. So Murray served a lot to Federer's backhand, to Federer's body on break points.
Right.
And that worked with Federer because Federer just seemed to not necessarily exactly read.
He wasn't quite reading.
Yeah, he couldn't read the serve. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other point too. Is like you mentioned in this match, especially after the first set. I mean, she was reading the serve like a book. She was anticipating. She was taking those little small adjustment steps and just placing the ball in a really awkward spot. And there were a few points where she was hitting return winners, just straight up return winners, either down the line on the ad side, off her backhand, or some of her backhand slices that were working very well in Navratilova's favor. In the first set, she was having a lot of success, like serving to Steffi's backhand, getting it up high, getting it wide, and Graf wasn't really in the optimal position in the ball that would come next. But what I noticed in the second set was that she was adjusting her return position so that she was standing in the doubles alley almost, and just anticipating that wide serve over and over and over. So then Martina felt like, okay, I can go to the tee, I can go to the body, but that tactic just proved to be, it worked on occasion, but it wasn't a consistent enough tactic to where She wasn't able to anticipate anymore, and then once it came to the baseline, I felt that Graf was just overpowering Martina.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find interesting in her Grand Slam run,
Mhm.
in the Olympics, I believe she lost one set as well, or either she lost either one or two sets en route to winning the gold medal.
Right.
Um, and if I'm not mistaken, just as like a side note that I wanted to give was apparently she didn't have much time to rest after the U.S. Open, and
Right.
she which now is it's kind of funny that to think that the Olympics are
Yeah,
well,
the Olympics
I'm not
were
sure.
after the
Yeah,
U.S. Open. I noticed that. I was
yeah,
kind of surprised.
yeah. And I don't know if what do you think? Does that make
Mhm.
the defeat more impressive, or
Yeah,
do you
to
think,
me,
for example, if for example Nadal would have
mhm.
won the his gold medal, or anyone else for that matter, and won all of the Grand Slams, but having won the gold medal after Wimbledon and then going into the US Open, what do you think takes a bigger toll on you, and how do you think a player gets more prepared for something after or before the US Open?
It's interesting actually in Nadal's case. Um, so he won Queens, he'd won Wimbledon, he played the hardcore tournaments leading up to the U.S. Open, and then there was the Olympics, sort of pre-U.S. Open, right? And so, that was almost like essentially another warm-up tournament for him, and it just gave him more confidence just heading into that US Open. But in this case, I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think it takes away anything. In fact, it's probably even more impressive because as you start getting closer to the end of the season, September, October, a lot of players start getting more fatigued, and just the travel and that wear and tear just sort of just sticks in your craw a little bit. And most players are a little bit down. They kind of want to go, take a break from it all and have an off season right there and then. So for Steffi to then go after winning all four slams, and then still have that motivation to go after that gold medal. And she was tested. She was tested in the fourth round and the quarter. She was tested in, I want to say, the fourth round, right? And she actually lost a set and to a top 20 seed. I forget who it was.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, I'd have to look back.
yeah, but then to go and then play an excellent semifinal and final. And who did she beat in the semis?
I
She
think
beat
I'm
Zena
gonna look it up
Garrison. She
here.
beat Zena Garrison in the semis,
Yeah,
and she won it
yeah,
easily, like 6-2, 6-0. And
yeah.
then,
Which is
yeah,
this is her score for the Olympic Games. By the way, she got a bye in the round of 64. She was seeded number one.
mm,
Obviously, she beat Leila Mishki
right.
Meski from Georgia 7-5, 6-1. 7-5 was rather impressive, and that's when it started. Like, then Catherine Sweer 6-3, 6-0, and then the first test and only pretty much Larissa Neeland from
Was that
Latvia 6-2, 4-6, and then
was
6-3,
that the quarters?
and then that was the
Okay, yeah,
quarterfinals. Yeah, and then in the semifinal, as you said, Zina Garrison 6-2, 6-love,
right.
and then Gabriela Sabatini in the final 6-3,
6-3, 6-3.
6-3.
Yeah, so I mean, her
Yeah.
her last five sets of the tournament were all 6-3 or less.
Mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, I mean,
And this is
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Just to go back to your question, I don't think it takes
Yeah.
anything away. In fact, it's probably more
Yeah.
impressive.
Mm. Yeah, there are two things about it that I want to say. Like, one, it's that I think it's so incredible. Like, probably the mental toll that it takes on you, as you said, like the motivation. And there are two things about it that well, at least one thing. For example, you come after winning all of the Grand Slams.
Yeah,
There's only the gold medal left for you, right? Like, I mean, probably the notion of Golden Slam didn't exist. She created
yeah.
that
She coined that term.
by winning. Yeah, but I cannot even imagine, like, if you
Yeah.
win the four
In
Grand
today's
Slams.
game, it would be nearly impossible to
Yeah,
pull that off.
and I think if I were a player back in the day, if I were her and I had won all the Grand Slams in the same year, in the same season, I could be either of two. I could be either extremely exhausted mentally. I couldn't even bear the fact that I won so much, and I would come up with so much pressure that I probably would crack. Or I would be so pumped and so confident of my game that I would probably go on and win. And I have no idea what was happening in Graf's head when she did it. She was probably not even thinking. She was just going.
Running on
And
its own.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah. And then at the end she just wins.
Yeah.
Like she just puts her arms in the air and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like a fairy tale type story
Hmm.
where almost like nobody in the history of tennis has ever done, and it will probably never be matched. Like I just can't see it.
Yeah.
And she was how old was she in 1988? She was 18 years old, or 19,
88, she was 18 and turned 19
in June.
over the
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, as a 19-year-old to win four slams and the Olympics in the same year. I mean, there were players like, Martina Hingis later on who won slams at 16 or 17, but none of them had the kind of consistency, and none of them were all surface players like the way Steffi was. She made it look so easy that it's forgotten today.
Yeah, I guess there's a little bit too full, maybe in that sense. Maybe, well, it's a graph, and she made it look easy. But I think that there is one of the problems as well, which
Which
is
is,
how sometimes we're a little bit
oh,
biased
yeah,
in how we talk about
yeah,
records, and I feel like we tend to elevate a lot more of the men's game. As I said, like I didn't
and
even know
yeah,
that was an Martina and Everett when I started following, and they had way more slams than Federer.
yeah,
And now Serena has like 23 and she's closing into 24.
yeah,
Still pretty much a favorite whenever she goes on to court.
exactly. And
So
yeah, just to
yeah,
add on that, I mean, like whenever you say like, oh, she made it look easy, that's not to take anything away from the achievement or the accomplishment on its own. It's just that the fact that we have to kind of think like, oh wow, there were players before the big three or before Serena that achieved so much in the game, and it's almost like people today, because of the fan groups and because of social media, because of just how divided sometimes fans are, that we cherry pick and we choose certain statistics because we have certain biases towards one player that we grew up following, that connected us to the game, whether it be Nadal, Federer, or Sampras, Agassi, anybody really. And we sometimes forget what the eras before did, and so that's why these podcasts and these relived episodes are just such a good reminder of just how underrated some of the achievements really are. And yeah, I mean, Graf is just no exception to that. In fact, she probably tops it all out. Like, just period, greatest season ever.
yeah. And there there's a thing too, like in that same vein, like I find um there is it's just like when you start like doing the relived and looking at old matches, and that there's another account on Twitter, I think it's called Tennis Aloha,
Yeah,
who is currently following the whole 90 seasons, and
yeah.
that's so much work to for me. Like I cannot even imagine like seeing so many tennis
I don't know
matches.
how he.
And yeah, how can you possibly, it's 10 years worth of tennis matches, man. So it's a lot. I praise, I applaud that effort. And when you hit the nail in the head there, like when you said like people seem to think that tennis starts and ends with the big
Yeah,
three, and a lot of that is obviously
recency
because of
bias.
recency bias and social media and the fact that we are able to see them like time and time again. And I think it's so worth it to look back and like see the other seasons, because you see that it's not that they're not accomplished. Like they obviously are incredible players, and they're almost rewriting in the sense like the way the tennis is being played. And I don't think that they're affecting only men's play, but I believe they're affecting women's game as well. As much as Serena Williams, I believe, is affecting the way a lot of players play the game and the men's as well. Um, but they're by no means the by far the best players who have ever lived. They're by no means the players who hold like the most important what's it called, the records. There's so many history that's worth like looking into, and it is it's I was gonna say it's not that far, but now it's 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, but it's still somewhat recent in a sense, like and going back all the way to at least the Open era, because as we said before then, it was a little bit of a difficult time because only amateurs were allowed to play the Grand Slams. But it's appreciating a lot of how tennis has evolved and how much players have been able to contribute to the game and bring along like so many of those coveted titles and coveted records. Like for example, the career slam, which was something that was done by Rod Laver and Margaret Court as well. And the Golden Slam is the type of stuff that I think it comes because she accomplished that. It's not something that people are looking into having before. It's just because somebody did
set
it
the precedent,
before.
and,
Yeah.
and then it became coined,
Yeah.
and and people look at it today and just I think there's a couple of points I want to make here. One is that this is where the kind of the greatest of all time debate just kind of falls short, because it's like you're not taking into account every single year from the Open era when you're talking. It's really just who is the best across those 15 years. That's fair to say, because Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, or Serena, Venus, Hingis, whatever, they all played at the same time. So it's easier to make that comparison. But to discount, it's kind of like the Steffi to me is kind of, there's an interesting parallel here. It's kind of like in 2002 when Sampras retired, right? He had 14 slams. He retired at the U.S. Open, beat Agassi, retired on a high, and said, "Okay, I'm done." And little did he think that 7 years later that record would be eclipsed by Roger Federer in 2009, and then two other guys would come and eclipse it again, and then now all of a sudden, people just throw Sampras under the bus, like, oh, he was nothing compared to the big three. He wouldn't have, and they just completely discount all of his 7 Wimbledons and all of his achievements, or they almost put an asterisk by it as if to say, oh, this was before these guys came, so that's why he was able to win so much. I'm like, that's not how it works, and that's a little bit what I feel like, because of the dominance of Serena and because of her longevity too, from 1999 to about 2019, still reaching slam finals.
She's going to compete in her 5th Olympics, I think.
Across 4 decades. So because of their longevity and because of their achievements, we tend to forget and we tend to underrate the achievements of players that came before them. So in a way, I mean, Steffi Graf, because she finished on 22, you could argue a lot of her winning percentages and her records are more impressive than Serena. But because we give that importance to that Grand Slam tally, it's all about the Grand Slam race, now. And so because of that, immediately Serena is seen as superior at 23. And if you actually go back and you dig and you see, okay, Serena's 23-10 in slam finals, it's fairly close, and Graf is 22-9, and you start digging and you start seeing across who they played. But it just, to me, the greatest of all time is the wrong question to be asking. It's more like we might never know who the greatest is. I just don't think it's like, there's just too many variables. There's a lot changed in so many years for that to be the question. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay. In that sense, like there's I think it's the wrong question in that people almost die, like live and die for answering this question, in a sense, like almost kind of becomes part of this debate. But I don't think it's the wrong question in how. I think it's still such a fun debate to have. I think it's such a great, because because otherwise if I just like straight up like say here like, oh yeah, the GOAT debate is ridiculous, I'd be almost hypocritical, because I did an episode about the GOAT, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I really love thinking about those things as well, because when you compare and contrast those things, I think that's you can either become a crazy fan and just kind of like discredit everything else that everybody did because it was not your favorite, or you can just look at those things and learn more about the statistics and learn more about the records that they've set and how difficult it was and how difficult it still is. And even through this, I feel like looking through those records and things that they've done, I think it's possible to even look forward into the game and see why just essentially just trying to apply changes or apply critical thinking of to how the sport has evolved and whether there is something that we need to change, not necessarily in order to be able to get those records back in the books, but like to get somebody to actually make those records again, to break those records, but just to see just how kind of like just to follow the times. Like for example, the whole point of the best of 5 set matches being under discussion as well, and the fact that the Australian Open has a tiebreaker in the 5th set, and then Wimbledon has a tiebreaker in the 5th set, even though it's at 12-12. Those are things that change with the time, and they reflect just how difficult are, not necessarily how difficult, but how much the game has changed and how physical it has become and how much the equipment has changed and things like that. So that because, say, for example, Djokovic wins on a tiebreaker against Federer, it doesn't put an asterisk on his record because he did it. So I think those are things that we can look at, like, and you can pull those things out from the GOAT debate as well, because when you're doing GOAT debates, you're looking invariably at their records and the biggest domination years that they've had and how their careers spanned, and like how many titles they've done so far, how many wins, how dominant against their rivals they were, and things like that. And there's always a lot of fun in considering those things and thinking about which record is more valuable, which record is better, which record seemed to be a little bit more difficult to accomplish. But yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I said that, like, even though it's difficult to compare men and women, saying that
fun
Graf,
debate to have. Like, it's just that, we'll never really know what, we're never going to come to a definitive conclusion in these debates, but there's just so much fun to have, and there's just so much statistics and so many things, like you said, like the game changed and tiebreaker introduced, and now all those slams have different, like, what do you do when you get to 6-all in the 5th? Now it's different at all 4 slams, and the precedents that were created. I mean, before 1974 there was no tiebreakers in individual sets too, so you would see scorelines like 8-6, 14-12, 11-9. And you go back and you're like, what? There was no tiebreaker? So I mean, those kind of things are very interesting. It's just that it's hard for me to really think and see, like, if you gave Bjorn Borg, who played in the 70s and won 6 Frenches and 5 Wimbledons, if you gave him the racket technology of today and equipment of today and professionalism people bring to the court today and their entourages, and you factor in the court speed and CPIs and all the and modern day social media and all that, how would he do? That kind of sense. It's very hard to kind of predict that. But I think within the same era, I think there's definitely you can compare. Like for instance.
Oh yeah, it's good to compare. Like it's fun as well.
I know that there was a writer for tennis.com who completely said that it's bogus. It's complete bogus, this GOAT debate, because like you said, Will, it's cherry picking, and it's like, what's your favorite pizza? Oh, it's pepperoni, but what's your number 2 pizza? So it's kind of that, and my take on it is it's somewhere in between. It's not quite that extreme, but it's also doesn't mean that you can start comparing like Lou Hode with, a future great in the game that's yet to come. So I think as long as you do it across different times, that's why even I put up a thread on Twitter. You can follow me at Vansh V2K, by the way. I pulled up a thread just kind of separating the generations just because I feel like in all the generations of both men's and women's, it's kind of because there's a lot of crossover between the different generations. It's kind of hard to pinpoint, and everybody peaked at different times too. So it's kind of hard to remember who all played at the same time in what era. So I think once you have lists of, let's say, 30, 40 players, and you can say, okay, wow, that was the competition of these 5 or 6 prime years. And then you separate the generations out into kind of buckets of 5 to 6 years. It makes doing the GOAT debate even more fun. Just because you can see like, oh wow, okay, wow, Lendl crossed over with Sampras, and from 1991 to 1993, and then start looking, oh, he was in his prime, oh, he was, and so there's just a lot of variables to consider, and it's like just never ending, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, exactly. And just to finish off, because we were running out of time finally, it's always good to have those debates, because tennis spans for so long, and that there's obviously endless statistics that you can compare and contrast.
Definitely,
that was
I just wanted to jump in and add one other thing. One other really cool parallel that actually I just noticed with Steffi Graf in particular. In 1988, it was also paralleled with Mats Wilander. In 1988, who also had a very dominant year, and he won 3 out of the 4 slams and finished world number 1 on the men's side. And it's just the reason why I think Steffi Graf 1988 is also incredibly memorable and will be forever remembered in history, is it also was only one of 2 years where both a dominant male and a female were so dominant in that same season and won and racked up all the titles at the same time in the same year. You know what I mean? Like Mats Wilander 1988 is Steffi Graf 1988. They both were clear-cut number ones, and you'd have to go back. I mean, before that, there was no other season like that, except for recently, 2015 actually, when you had Serena Williams and Djokovic, both 1 year, both 1 slam away. So I thought I'd just bring that up just because it parallels with a little bit of today, Djokovic, Serena, and Wilander and Steffi, 1988.
Yeah. So all there is to say, like the final note before I close off, is that it's just always good to like look in tennis history and like see them for what they are as well. Like we don't have to necessarily be comparing all the time. Just looking at Graf's Golden Slam, it's by itself an incredible feat. I don't have to be comparing this to like how Nadal is doing or how Serena Williams is doing. It's
right.
It's they're both incredible players on their own credit. And this season itself, it's for me one of the most remarkable, if not the most remarkable season in history. And that's it. That's it for this episode. That was a little bit of Graf's Golden Slam and how this affected the tennis world, really, how this rocked the tennis world essentially. And as Vansh said, you can follow him on Twitter at VanshV2K. Yep. And do you have anything else that you have for on media, like a blog or something like that?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So a little bit actually about myself. I'm currently a brand ambassador actually for Cracked Racquets. So you can follow them on Twitter at Cracked Racquets, and I'm also coming out with a piece actually. It should be coming out next week. It's on Palermo, and because WTA tennis just resumed this week, and there's an event in Italy going on, and so I'll be probably doing a piece on that. And pretty soon I'll also be previewing U.S. Open dark horses. Those articles will come out, so stay tuned on Cracked Racquets, and you can see more coverage there. Additionally, I do have a blog that I like to pep. It's called @TennisFanForLife. It's not been very active, but if you want to look back at between 2015 and 2018, I've kept an archive of articles and pieces and cool statistics just in the bank to look at and kind of remember and relive. So that's my blog, and I kind of transitioned from that and got into more writing and at Cracked Racquets. I also was a writer for Tennis View magazine, and I covered the slams same time that I had my blog from 2015 to 2018. So yeah,
All right, so that's it. That's Vanch, guys, and yeah, make sure you keep up with him on social media and follow all of the stuff that you just heard, which are also going to be in the descriptions. And when his blog, his piece is coming out, I'm going to post them on my social media as well, which you can follow on Twitter at and Rolenberg, and on Facebook as well as just Tennis and Bagels, and Instagram at Tennis and Bagels as well. I don't necessarily post a crap ton there, but like I do have plans of like going a little bit deeper into those stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Vansh, for being here today. I'm looking forward to having you again very soon.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun discussing and diving deep into a lot of different tennis topics. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think our fans or our listeners will really enjoy it. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully we'll do it again soon. Thank you so much, Andre.
No problem, man. See you later, and see you all listeners later as well. Bye-bye.